Nothing is better than taking care of business against division rivals, and the Jets did exactly that against the St. Louis Blues on the road. We'll dive into how the game went and some observations from a big Jets victory on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now because new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 back if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, obviously the Jets had a game this evening. This one against the St. Louis Blues. It was a road game, and after a big win over the weekend against the Arizona Coyotes, where the Jets perhaps made it a little more interesting than they needed to, the Jets had a big opportunity to have a statement game. Now, it didn't start off quite auspiciously. Winnipeg was definitely second best, and the Blues came out generally swinging. I thought that they had better scoring opportunities. Their passing was crisper. Their zone exits were decent. And it took a bit for the Jets to start rolling. Winnipeg, though, got an early power play. And lo and behold, the Jets actually scored on it. I mean, that's not something that you hear very often with this team. But hey, the Jets actually had a power play and they converted. This one was a nice little tap-in from Mark Scheifele, who was working down low. And of course, we know that Scheifele honestly needed a goal. It sounds strange to talk about a guy who has now scored 5 on the year needing a goal, but I feel like the top line has been backsliding a bit, right? That combo of Connor and Scheifele has not really been doing what you'd hope, right? And Iafallo hasn't been able to improve that unit as much. But here they all kind of connected for a nice power play goal. And, the Jets were back in front. But then, the Blues kind of started surging again, and the Jets again had to respond. Thankfully, Neil Pionk had a great, right face-off circle snipe that just beat Binnington pretty cleanly. It was a great shot. Pionk actually had quite a bit of space to work, and quietly, Iafallo and Scheifele both notched a few other assists. Now, it wasn't all great because 30 seconds later, Robert Thomas scored on a bit of a messy transition in defense, but thankfully the Jets came away on the right side of that first period with a 2-1 lead. And, as the period wore on, the Jets started skating more, right? A very simple thing to say, but Winnipeg started looking a little bit more like Winnipeg. The second period rolls around, and the Jets are really starting to click on all cylinders. Winnipeg was faster, they were winning second chance pucks, and offensively inside the attacking areas, Winnipeg was creating lots of pressure. And when the Jets do this, especially in waves, that's when this team starts to really play serious hockey. And look, here's the thing, right? St. Louis is a very bad team. They're one of the worst teams in a couple of key stats categories. The record's not terrible, but the Blues have not been good this year. And I think this game was really exemplary of what has kind of gone wrong for St. Louis. They are sluggish. Their team speed is slow. They make really bad passes. Defensively, they struggle to make zone clearances. A lot of basic stuff that if you watch the Jets over the last few years, you'd honestly start to recognize. It's very similar to what has plagued Winnipeg. And some of you probably started getting a few chills and shivers watching a very, very familiar sight. But In this case, it was not the Jets dealing with this problem, and somehow, against all odds, the Jets got another power play goal in the second period. This one courtesy of Kyle Connor, who sort of almost like knuckleballed it off of an opposing player's stick. Thankfully, though, because it's Kyle Connor, his initial shot was very hard, and it just very quickly deflected off of the Blues player's stick and past Binnington to make it 3-1. Things you love to see, a big evening for this top power play unit. And after that, it continued in Winnipeg's favor. Third period, the Jets were still rolling pretty decently, and Kyle Connor notched his second goal of the night, while Scheifele and Iafallo collected a few other points. You're noticing a couple of key names pretty frequently on this scoring sheet. The top line had a day to remember. And we haven't always said that recently. I think the first line has been a little bit rough around the edges. Connor, we know, has had his own issues. Scheifele has kind of looked okay at times, but perhaps not as effective as he was earlier in the season. And so it's nice to see them rolling again. Iafallo was dangerous and creative. All of this stuff, it's nice to see. And look, I get it, right? St. Louis is not a great opponent. This is not really a team that I would use as a huge measuring stick necessarily, but you have to take care of business against weaker opponents. And the Jets, for the most part, did. The only thing I would say is that on some odd man rushes and stuff, there were moments where, like defending in transition, you notice the Jets had some issues, right? Maybe they lost an assignment. Maybe the Blues had a nice odd man rush. There were moments where I think the Jets probably got a little bit fortunate, on these counters, right? This is stuff that the Jets have given up to to the Vegas Golden Knights and other teams that have punished them pretty harshly for it. But thankfully, the Blues being the Blues, the Jets kind of got away relatively unscathed. The only other Blues goal on the evening was a Schenn goal that, quite frankly, shouldn't have gotten through. Hellebuck seemingly just got surprised by the shot, and having not really faced many Blues shots for the entire evening, Helly did kind of let this one squeak through him. So not ideal, but all's well that ends well. The Jets had a nice empty net to shoot at, and Arneal smartly put out, the Cole Perfetti line, which we've been asking for a while because, defensively speaking, Perfetti is a very industrious, hardworking player who not only forces turnovers, but also defends pretty well, especially late in games. And as a reward for the faith placed in Perfetti, he notched an empty net goal. So everyone really comes away looking like a winner, right? Perfetti gets ice time late, he scores, and the coaching staff looks like it pulls off a masterstroke. So sometimes the little things that you think might not matter really do pay dividends. And using Perfetti late in games, I promise you, is going to be a much better thing to do, even when you're defending a lead. He's a super smart player, very industrious and hardworking. I think he will be a great late game threat, or perhaps just another defensive presence, right? Even if that's all that he provides, I promise you it is worth putting him out there. Now, obviously, since the Jets season's kicked off, we've had a couple of interesting bounce-back season candidates. We'll talk about who has been really living up to expectations or perhaps even exceeding them. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $50 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. Those of you like me who are Ravens fans probably feel pretty good about this, but if you are a Vikings fan, maybe you want to give a little bit of a confidence shot right towards Josh Dobbs. If you are riding the Dobbs train, well, you can get $150 back in bonus bets if the Vikings win. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends. Welcome back to these thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you for rejoining us as we talk about some recent player performances that I would consider bounce-back seasons, right? Guys who have really done well after perhaps a turbulent last season. First guy that I think is very much worth shouting out and who has really, really impressed me this season is Mason Appleton. Now, this mostly applies more towards his third line deployments than his top line deployments. I think we know that when Mason moves up to the Kyle, Connor, and Mark Scheifele line, things are a little bit rougher. But primarily, Appleton has been played on the third line with Lowry and Niederreiter, and they have been dominant. Like as a trio, best line on the team, offensively ambitious, creative down low, creating tons of chaos, and really strong offensively to the point where opposing teams can't really make exits cleanly. So Appleton has been a huge contributor in that area. Up until this evening, he was the joint top scorer on the team, which I don't think anyone expected. I think he had 5 goals or something, maybe 4 goals, something along those lines. And I suppose no one had that on their list, but Appleton has been a really nice player and really has had a much stronger performance this year than I was expecting. I think it's really important that he kind of bounces back because he was being paid a pretty decent chunk of cash, and I think a lot of folks maybe had, I would say, modest expectations for him. Sorry, he has 3 goals and 6 assists so far for a total of 9 points. 9 points in 12 games, considering the minutes that he's playing and the role that he's been cast in. It's pretty darn good, right? But I think it's more than just the points. You notice that in the forechecking areas, he's been very effective. He's been creative down low. In this game, he actually had a couple of scoring opportunities. One that was a really nice one on a one-time feed that Binnington had to make a great save on right in the central slot area. This is all stuff that you want to see from him. Like at one point, he was kind of hailed as the sort of Andrew Kopp replacement. And I don't know that he'll ever quite be at the level that Kopp was when he was at his best. But I think, if he even comes close to it, that's a huge win. And so far in that third line role, he has been an absolute terror. So I'd love for him to keep doing that. I think he's already shown tons of promise in that role. So very happy to see that. And it can only mean good things for the Jets. Next candidate, of course, is going to be Mark Scheifele. Scheifele, look, right? The thing with Mark is that when he's motivated and he feels aggressive and like he's following the right plan, the dude is a force to be reckoned with. I know that his scoring so far to start the season has been a little bit more modest than I think we'd hope. And I think part of that has been that the line that he's on isn't really it's not the right fit, right? I don't know that Scheifele and Connor should play together for much longer. I know that they had a great game against the Blues together, and that trio in general for the top line was really strong. But I think going forward, right, you'd probably expect that against better teams, that group might not be as effective. So Scheifele, in his own right, has just been a great finisher. He's had some really important moments. His passing and his skating towards the slot have been nice. He had some nice scoring opportunities against St. Louis. It's just the sort of stuff that you really expect from him on a pretty consistent basis. He is and has the ability to be one of Winnipeg's best overall attackers and players when he's at his best. I mean, the guy is, he was hand selected to be part of Team North America for a reason all those years ago at the World Cup of Hockey. He might not have elite defensive prowess, and he might not be on, McKinnon or McDavid's level, but I promise you his skill and creativity and his finishing are more than enough to be a really excellent top-line center. And so far, he has been pretty strong this season. Yeah, obviously, the defensive side of things may be a bit of a different question, but overall, right, not too much to be upset about with his performance. But in terms of other bounce back candidates, I suppose you could talk about David Gustafsson a bit. I think Gustafsson, for me, I wasn't really putting him in the category of bounce backs because he hasn't really had enough time to, get tons of NHL minutes and earn a big role. But in the fourth line role that he's had this year, he scored a couple of goals. He's been, an effective forechecker. Really like to see him, be used more because I feel like under the surface, there's a really talented player there. And if he gets more ice time and he gets paired with skill, I think you'll start to see why I was so high on him for all of these seasons. I guess if we're going for a really obvious breakout candidate, and this will be the last, or a bounce back candidate, and this will be the last one on the list, it's Cole Perfetti, right? And I don't really call him a bounce back in the usual sense. I would say he's more of a bounce back because he just came back from injury. He has finally started to near his 82nd NHL game, which is a big deal. And he's also one of the top even strength primary assist makers in the whole league, right? He is a creative force at even strength. On the power play, still kind of getting there, but overall, Perfetti has been a blessing for this team. He gets a second goal against the Blues. It was an empty netter, maybe not, the elegant finish that you'd be looking for, but his passing and distribution have been so good that it doesn't really matter. He's constantly setting up goals for his line mates. He's constantly involved in the buildup, and defensively, he is as responsible as anyone. So Perfetti, for me, after having, so much time off last year, has rejoined, bounced back, and looks like he never really stopped playing. It's been great to see him. He is super resilient and surprisingly hardy for a guy who has missed a decent chunk of time recently. And increasingly, the more that he does well at this level, the more that, the Jets are going to trust him to take on bigger and bigger responsibilities. Perhaps even moving him back to center at some point. I don't know if that's going to happen this year or if it's something for down the road. But so far, the early returns on the season for Perfetti are awesome. Now, as much as I've been happy with those guys, there's one player that I'm starting to wonder about, in the present and longer term picture. A guy who's been here for many years, who is one of our favorite players, and who, this season just hasn't looked right. We'll talk about who this guy is and what might have to happen with him in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Mark Scheifele could score 50 goals. The Winnipeg Jets might even host the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy sports app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. This is a great time for those of you who are huge stats nerds. Maybe you've been following McKinnon or McDavid this year. Perhaps some underrated stars like Sean Couturier's return from injury. Whoever it is that you back and support, whether it's players who are on the Jets or elsewhere, perhaps it's time for you to make use of your expert knowledge and pick whether top players like these guys have higher or lower stats evenings versus what Sleeper projects for these guys, including, goals, assists, saves, and so much more. Now, if you want to win 100 times your cash, all you have to do is get at least 8 of these categories, are on target. You've got to get them right. And if you do, you are going to make some serious bank. That's right, Jets fans. You can win 100 times your cash if you correctly call those 8 stats categories. So use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode and closing thoughts as we talk about a player that is very near and dear to my heart, but who, quite frankly, has struggled to really make the kind of impact that we're used to. This is, of course, Nik Ehlers. I've talked about him before as having had a really disappointing start to the year, but Ehlers recently has just not looked right. There's definitely a step that's been lost to his game. And I think having had the sports hernia surgery and stuff, it's taken a bite out of him, right? There's no quickness as explosive as what he used to have. And you'll notice that when he's skating, the top gear is about a half step to a full step slower than what he was in previous seasons. He was a guy that we called fly because he flew up and down the ice, but now he just looks more modest in his stride. And there's also an increasing problem with him turning the puck over a lot. And I don't know if it's because he's used to making certain passes and plays at speed, and now that he's not able to, he's still trying it and trying to force it, or he's trying to perhaps compensate for the lack of space creation by attempting riskier and riskier plays for like high risk, high reward sort of situations. The problem for Ehlers is that most of that's just led to turnovers. And, the creativity and skill and passing that we're used to with him has been kind of, I wouldn't say absent necessarily, because you'll see flashes of it where it looks more like the old Ehlers, but I can tell you right now, it's just not been anywhere near the sort of impact that we're used to having with him. And that kind of brings up a really big question that I've had. Obviously it's very early in the season and it's probably too early to hit the panic button, but I would say 15, 20 games down the road, if it's still like a problem that we're seeing with him, I might start talking about shutting him down for at least part of the season. Ehlers is one of our most important attackers. So when I talk about this, I don't say it lightly. If he's really not doing well and he really needs more time to recover, and this level of play from him is what we're going to see for the rest of the year, I would genuinely consider trying to figure out a lineup option, especially once Velarde returns, to replace Ehlers and just give him time to heal and come back, maybe towards the playoffs if he's feeling up to it. If not, maybe just work on a return next season, because like Ehlers in this current state is more of a liability than he is a help, and that's never a situation that you want to run into with him, because not only is it really bad for the team, but also it's really bad for him personally. I mean, like, I'm sure it's very frustrating that he feels like he's not able to contribute at the level that he's used to. And, these mistakes and turnovers and stuff that he's committing are at an all-time high. And I'm sure it pisses him off that he feels like he can't get his body to do what he wants it to do, especially with all of the recent injuries and stuff that he's had. So, look, I don't really want to say that shutdown is the best option. I think it would be an option should the Jets feel that their hand is forced. I would tend to shy away from it unless things, again, keep continuing on the current path and there's no real sign of improvement. If things start to turn around and Ehlers is looking more and more like himself, then we don't need to have this conversation. But like I said, 15, 20 games down the road, if it's still looking like this, you really do need to start asking whether he should finish the season out or if he should spend some time recovering and rehabbing, because it's clear that this year, at least, he is not who he once was. And, obviously with sports hernia injuries, it can be as long as a year for some guys to recover and get back to form, or for some other players, they just have this thing permanently where they're not the same. And I'm really hoping it's not the latter, because that would be really problematic for so many reasons, for Ehlers in particular. But I'm going to say for now, let's be optimistic and hope that that is not the case and that this is just perhaps part of the rehab process. Maybe it takes the full year. I don't know. But either way, if the Jets do shut down Nik, it could be beneficial to get him back towards the playoffs and see him fully rested up. But obviously, I don't know that Winnipeg is going to be eager for that. I'm sure Ehlers himself does not want to spend time riding pine and, in the press box healing up. He wants to be out there and be an active contributor and creator. And in parts of the Blues game, you could see him look more and more like his old self. But the rest of his game has definitely taken a bit of a hit. We'll have to see if it changes over the next few weeks, but all I can say is it is a really big concern for me, and I think for an increasing number of Jets fans, we're all sort of wondering, when is Nik Ehlers coming back? We'll think about that over the next few weeks as the Jets continue to roll through their season. But obviously, Winnipeg has action ahead, against the Nashville Predators and Dallas Stars to close the week out. We'll talk about how the Jets can prepare for Nashville on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, every day. We will see you back here tomorrow for even more Jets coverage, so don't go anywhere. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, have a great night, and go Jets go.